The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the fines. It wasn't the nasty letters slipped under my door or the rules taped to my fence in the dead of night. It was the sound. Every single morning, like clockwork, my trash can knocked. Over, spilling across the driveway. At first, I thought it was an accident. Maybe an animal, maybe the wind. But then I saw her. The HOA president, 30-something, dressed in the loudest, most shocking clothes you've ever seen, standing in the middle of my yard like she owned it. Her arms crossed, her eyes blazing, two young police officers flanking her like she was royalty. And when I stepped outside to ask what she thought she was doing, she didn't even answer. She just smiled, the kind of smile that says, "Try me." That's when I realized this wasn't about trash. This was about control, about humiliation, about breaking me one petty act at a time. But here's the thing about people who think they're untouchable. They never see it coming when the tables turn, so I set a trap, one that she definitely didn't see coming, and when it finally snapped, shut? Let's just say, the entire neighborhood was watching. What would you do if the very person sworn to protect the community declared war on you? The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind with trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and sidewalks that look more like they were designed for show than for actual use. On the surface, everything appeared picture perfect. The kind of community where real estate flyers boasted family-friendly living and HOA-managed excellence. But as anyone who has ever lived under the thumb of an HOA knows, perfection is often just a performance. In the middle of this neighborhood lived Mark, a young homeowner in his early 30s. He wasn't flashy, didn't throw wild parties, and wasn't the type to stir up trouble. He worked a regular 9-to-5 job, wore jeans and t-shirts most days, and spent his free time mowing his lawn, tinkering in the garage, and chatting with the few neighbors who hadn't yet been scared off by the HOA's rules. To most people, he was simply the guy with the well-kept yard and the friendly dog. But to one person, the person who mattered most in this community, he was a target. That person was the HOA president. She was impossible to ignore. A woman in her mid-30s, always dressed in shocking, colorful outfits that clashed with the muted beige tones of the houses around her. Today, it was a bright, hot pink suit, paired with oversized sunglasses that looked more suited for a runway than a homeowners meeting. Her voice carried across the street like a siren whenever she spoke, sharp, angry, and laced with the kind of authority that didn't need to be earned but was taken by force. Behind her, as always, stood two police officers, young, fair-skinned. In full uniform, they were less about law enforcement and more about stage props. Their presence wasn't for crime prevention, it was for intimidation. Neighbors whispered about how she managed to pull strings to get them to show up for even the smallest disputes. And every time she stormed across a lawn or driveway, the officers followed like shadows, silent reminders of her power. For Mark, the first sign of trouble came in the smallest form, his yard. He had always taken pride in it, a neat strip of green grass, a few flower beds, and a simple wooden fence he'd repaired himself. Nothing extravagant, nothing out of place. But To the HOA president, every blade of grass seemed like a personal challenge. She didn't see a tidy yard. She saw violations waiting to be written up, infractions to be magnified, fines to be sent. The first knock on his door was almost theatrical. Daylight blazed overhead, illuminating the pink-suited figure standing squarely at his front step, sunglasses reflecting the neighborhood like a mirror. The officers lingered behind her, stone-faced, hands resting on their belts. Without saying a word, she pointed toward his yard, as if her finger alone carried legal authority. A single flower pot out of alignment, a patch of grass an inch taller than the rest. To her, this wasn't just a minor detail. It was disrespect. Mark, however, didn't flinch. He leaned casually against the door frame, the hint of a smirk on his face. Where she brought fury, he brought calm. Where she saw violations, he saw life. And in that subtle difference, the seeds of conflict were planted. The neighbors began to notice the pattern. Every few days, like clockwork, the president would appear in her neon-colored suits. One day orange, another day lime green, then yellow so bright it nearly blinded onlookers. And every time, she had something new to complain about in Mark's yard. A misplaced trash bin, a tool left by the fence, a dog toy near the walkway. Each offense, no matter how small, was delivered with the same fiery outrage. And each time, Mark greeted her with the same composure, never giving her the satisfaction of anger. His relaxed demeanor, his refusal to cower, only fueled her fury. What made it worse for her was that other residents started watching. They leaned from porches, peeked through blinds, whispered about how one man seemed to be standing up to the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. The spectacle grew with each confrontation. The HOA president in her shocking clothes, flanked by her uniformed entourage, barking accusations at a man who seemed almost amused by the whole ordeal. This wasn't just about a yard anymore. This was about power. And in a place where appearances meant everything, the president couldn't afford to be mocked, ignored, or laughed at. Mark knew it too. He could feel the tension building, see the storm clouds gathering even in the bright daylight. What began as petty knocks on his door had the makings of a full-blown neighborhood drama. She wasn't going to stop. If anything, she was going to escalate. And though Mark didn't show it outwardly, deep down, he was already planning. Because if she thought she could control every inch of his yard, she was about to learn that some traps aren't laid in the grass. They're laid in plain sight. At first, the HOA president's appearances on Mark's property were little more than interruptions. Loud, colorful storms that blew in and out, leaving behind the faint smell of perfume and the sharper sting of her accusations. But as the weeks wore on, those interruptions evolved into something more dangerous. This wasn't just about grass length anymore. It wasn't about a trash bin slightly out of alignment. This was about power, about dominance. And in the world of an HOA, president who thrived on control, Mark's refusal to bend had become an open rebellion. The next strike came in the form of a letter, neatly folded, slipped under his door in the dead of night, The paper was printed on bright HOA stationery. The words were as cold as they were absurd. Yes, she had fined him for having grass that looked too healthy. When Mark read the letter, he almost laughed. Almost. But what stopped him was the last line, a warning written in bold. Failure to comply may result in HOA legal action and forced property correction. And just like that, the war wasn't just about petty annoyances anymore. It was financial, legal, and personal. The very next morning, as the sun spilled over the rooftops, the HOA president arrived in full spectacle. This time she wore an electric green blazer with sequins glinting under the daylight, a fashion choice so loud that even passing cars slowed to look. Behind her stood the same two young, fair-skinned police officers, their presence making the absurd situation look almost official. She planted herself at the edge of Mark's yard, finger jabbing the air like a weapon, her voice carrying over the hedges. "Non-compliance," she declared, as though announcing a crime to the entire block. Neighbors peeked from blinds, some bold enough to step onto their porches. Mark stood calmly, hands in the pockets of his jeans, leaning against his fence. His expression, half smile, half challenge, was gasoline on her already burning fire. The scene became a spectacle. Every word she shouted, every exaggerated gesture of her manicured hands only made her look more ridiculous. But there was nothing funny about the fines piling up in Mark's mailbox. It wasn't long before other homeowners got dragged into the drama. A young couple across the street, early 30s, casual shorts and tank tops, found themselves cited for improper fence decorations after hanging string lights for a birthday party. Another neighbor, a single mom in her 20s, was fined for leaving a child's bicycle in the each time. The pink-suited, orange-blazered, neon-clad president arrived flanked by her officers. Each time, the neighborhood became a stage, the conflict a performance. The bright daylight only made the absurdity shine brighter, like a spotlight on her unyielding fury. And each time, Mark was there, either watching or enduring his own share of citations. The neighborhood began whispering, gathering in hushed groups at night. The HOA president wasn't just enforcing rules. She was waging war. For Mark, the frustration wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. Every envelope in his mailbox felt like an attack on his freedom. Every public scene a calculated attempt to humiliate him. But he refused to give her what she wanted, submission. Instead, he started documenting everything. Every outrageous outfit she wore, every fine she issued, every ridiculous claim she made. He kept records, took photos, even filmed discreetly from his phone as she raged in the sunlight, flanked by her silent guards. The more she screamed, the calmer he became. And that contrast, her fury against his smug composure, only made the story grow more entertaining for the neighbors. Some even began to secretly root for him, quietly slipping him words of encouragement. But encouragement wasn't enough to stop what came next. One morning, Mark awoke to find a notice taped to his door. HOA mandated yard inspection scheduled. Non-compliance will result in escalated legal action. The inspection was set for the following Saturday at noon, and when that day arrived, the neighborhood turned into a theater. The HOA president appeared in her most outrageous outfit yet, a blinding yellow suit paired with leopard print heels that clicked dramatically on the pavement. Her oversized sunglasses reflected the gawking neighbors, while the two officers flanked her like actors in a play. She marched into Mark's yard with a clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every inch of property like a detective at a crime scene. She bent low to the grass, tapped her pen on a flower pot, circled around his trash bins like they were dangerous contraband. Mark followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, a half-smile playing on his lips. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Every exaggerated movement she made was only highlighting how absurd the whole thing was. When she finally stood tall, scribbling on her clipboard, she turned with a dramatic flair. "Non-compliant," she announced again, loud enough for the crowd of neighbors to hear. "This yard is officially in violation." The neighbors gasped. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads. The spectacle had reached a new level. But Mark only smiled wider, because what she didn't know was that he had been preparing. Mark walked to the edge of his property, looked at the growing crowd, then back at the furious president in her blinding yellow suit, and then he said the first words he had spoken publicly in weeks. "You've been so focused on what's in my yard," he said evenly. "You never once noticed what I've been building." Her face froze. The officers shifted. The neighbors leaned closer, behind. The fence, hidden in plain sight, something waited. Something she had walked past a dozen times without realizing. And at that moment, the tension reached its peak, because everyone knew that whatever Mark had planned, it was about to change everything. The day of the showdown arrived like a storm that everyone in the neighborhood had been waiting for. For weeks, whispers had passed from porch to porch, from mailbox to mailbox. Mark was planning something. No one knew exactly what, but they all felt it coming. And sure enough, on a bright Saturday afternoon, the HOA president returned. This time she wasn't just furious. She was radiant with rage, wrapped in an outfit so outrageous it nearly defied description. A neon orange pantsuit, sequined at the lapels, paired with electric blue heels that clicked like gunshots on the pavement. Her oversized sunglasses reflected. The gathering crowd, dozens of neighbors who had spilled from their houses to witness what had become the most anticipated drama on the block. Behind her, as always, stood her two young, fair-skinned officers, uniforms stiff under the sunlight, expressions carefully blank. Their presence lent the spectacle a twisted sense of legitimacy, as if this wasn't theater, but law. She marched straight to Mark's yard, her clipboard clutched in one manicured hand, her mouth already a weapon ready to fire. "Non-compliant," she barked before even reaching the gate. "This property is in open defiance of community regulations. Today, you will answer for your violations." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, others folded their arms. But all of them stayed. They wanted to see the clash, the final blow in a battle that had stretched far, too long. Mark, in his jeans and plain gray t-shirt, stepped forward with the same calm smirk he had worn for weeks. His posture alone seemed to mock her fury. Where she was fire, he was water. Where she was chaos, he was control. "You've been saying that for weeks," he replied coolly, his voice carrying in the silence. "But somehow, I'm still here. My yard is still here, and your power..." He gestured around dramatically. "Is starting to look more like a joke than authority." The neighbors chuckled. The president's face flushed crimson beneath her sunglasses. She whipped around to glare at the crowd, but the laughter only deepened. This wasn't just an inspection anymore. This was public theater, and she was the villain everyone had grown tired of. Her finger jabbed toward him. "Do you think this is funny? Do you think mocking the HOA is a game? I have the full support of this community's bylaws behind me." But the words rang hollow. Everyone could see the truth. This wasn't about bylaws. It was about pride, control, and humiliation. And that was exactly when Mark made his move. For weeks she had stormed across his property without noticing. For weeks she had stood in daylight yelling, pointing, blinded by her own fury. She had never stopped to actually look. Mark turned, walked casually to the side of his yard, and pulled back a section of his wooden fence. The crowd leaned forward. The president's sunglasses tilted, trying to catch a glimpse. And then, with a single motion, he revealed it. A brand new trash can system, custom built and gleaming under the sun. It wasn't just any bin. It was a massive, reinforced contraption. 1 part garbage storage, 1 part mechanical setup. The top was rigged with springs, the sides with hidden compartments, the base with wheels. It looked almost ridiculous, like something out of a cartoon, but there was no mistaking its purpose. It was a trap. The crowd burst into laughter. The president froze, her jaw slack beneath her orange lipstick. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice trembling with both anger and disbelief. Mark's smile widened. "That," he said slowly, "is the trash can you've been so obsessed with. You've knocked it over, fined me for it, written me up for it, so I built one just for you." The words hit like a spark in dry grass. The crowd roared. The officers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance. And the president, bright-suited, furious, vibrating with humiliation, did the one thing everyone half expected. She marched forward and kicked it. The trap worked instantly. The lid sprang open, launching a cloud of bright pink powder into the air. Dyed cornstarch, the kind used in fun runs and festivals, billowed in a massive plume, coating everything in reach. The HOA president staggered back, her neon orange suit instantly swallowed in a haze of pink dust. Her sunglasses slipped, her heels wobbled, and for the first time in weeks, she was utterly speechless. The crowd erupted. Laughter, applause, even cheers broke out. Neighbors pointed, doubled over, some recording the entire scene on their phones. The 2 officers tried, and failed, to keep straight faces. One coughed into his hand to hide a grin. The other turned slightly away, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. The president, however, was incandescent. She clawed at her suit, smeared the powder across her cheeks, and shrieked in pure fury. This is harassment," she screamed, her voice breaking. "This is a violation. You will pay for this." But no one was listening. They were too busy watching her flail, her once intimidating figure reduced to a cartoonish spectacle of bright orange and hot pink. Like a character from a Saturday morning show, Mark simply stood back, arms folded, smiling with quiet satisfaction. For once, he didn't have to say a word. The scene spoke for itself. Still, the president wasn't done. Not yet. She ripped off her sunglasses, revealing wild, furious eyes. Her finger shook as she pointed at Mark. "You think this is funny? You think you've won? I'll have you fined into the ground. I'll have you dragged into court. You'll lose this house before. I'm done with you." Her voice cracked, shrill under the blazing daylight, but every word only made her look weaker. The neighbors weren't intimidated anymore. They were emboldened. Some even booed. Others shouted back, calling out her hypocrisy, her endless harassment, her abuse of power. The tide had turned. For the first time, she wasn't the authority figure. She was the punchline. And in a community that thrived on appearances, humiliation was a wound she couldn't recover from. Mark stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the laughter. "You wanted control," he said evenly. "You wanted to make an example out of me. Well, congratulations. You got your example." He gestured toward the crowd, toward the phones recording, toward the neighbors watching with gleeful eyes. "Now the whole neighborhood sees you for what you really are." The president stood frozen, powder clinging to her neon suit, her pride shattered in the bright daylight. The officers didn't move. The crowd didn't leave. And in that silence, heavy and electric, everyone knew this was the breaking point. The battle was over. But the war, the consequences, the aftermath, was only beginning. The laughter that followed the powder explosion didn't fade quickly. It rolled down the street like thunder, echoing between houses, replayed on every smartphone that had captured it. The HOA president, once the most feared and untouchable figure in the neighborhood, now stood covered in hot pink dust, neon orange suit stained, her carefully constructed image shattered under the brightest of daylight. Behind her, the two young officers remained still, fair-skinned faces caught, somewhere between duty and disbelief. They had followed her for weeks, acting as silent shadows to her reign of pettiness. But now they looked more like props in a play gone wrong. Even they couldn't save her from the spectacle she had become. The neighbors, young families in jeans, and shorts, students, couples, and retirees were no longer hiding behind blinds. They were out in the open, laughing, clapping, some even jeering. Weeks of quiet resentment had burst like a dam, and now their frustration was released in the form of outright mockery. And Mark, calm, steady, smug in his jeans and plain t-shirt, stood tall in the middle of it all. His trap had worked. His silence, his patience, his refusal to bend had built to this very moment. The HOA president tried to recover. She wiped at the powder, but the more she rubbed, the worse it smeared. She shouted threats, demanded silence, insisted that every recording device be shut off immediately. But it was useless. The neighborhood didn't fear her anymore. Within hours, clips of the scene began circulating. First, through neighborhood group chats. Then, onto social media. By the end of the day, the video of the HOA president storming across Mark's yard, kicking his trash can, and being doused in pink powder was spreading faster than wildfire. Captions ranged from HOA Karen gets what she deserves to this is what standing up looks like. By the next morning, her power had crumbled. At the weekly HOA meeting, normally a quiet affair held in the community center, the room was overflowing. Neighbors who hadn't attended in years showed up, buzzing with energy, armed with questions and demands. And when the HOA president entered, still fuming, still wearing a new shocking outfit, a blinding fuchsia suit with golden trim, she was met not with silence, but with smirks. The two officers, as always, stood behind her, but their presence no longer intimidated anyone. If anything, it made the scene more absurd, like bodyguards protecting a reality TV villain no one respected anymore. She launched into her usual tirade, waving fines, citing bylaws, accusing homeowners of disrespect. But instead of cowed compliance, she was met with pushback. One neighbor stood and demanded her resignation. Another waved a phone showing the viral video. Another asked why police resources were being wasted on trash bins and flower pots. For the first time, her voice cracked. The anger was still there, the fury, the colorful clothes, but the authority was gone. Mark didn't speak much at that meeting. He didn't have to. He sat in the back, jeans and sneakers, arms folded. Every time her eyes landed on him, her face twisted with rage. He was the one who had humiliated her. He was the one who had shown the entire neighborhood that she could be beaten. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with patience, creativity, and a trap she never saw coming. The fines she had thrown at him began to unravel. Neighbors banded together, filing complaints, demanding reviews, questioning her authority. Legal letters that once felt like threats began to look more like paper tigers. And one by one, the weight of her control slipped away. The two officers, who had stood behind her for so long, eventually stopped showing up. Official complaints reached the precinct. Why were taxpayer resources being used for HOA drama? Why were officers acting as props for personal vendettas? Under scrutiny, the department quietly reassigned them. Without her entourage, without her shadows, the president looked smaller, weaker, less threatening. By the end of the season, the HOA president's reign was effectively over. She still lived in the neighborhood, still strutted out in her shocking suits, lime green one day, leopard print the next, still full of attitude, still pointing fingers. But no one cared anymore. Her words carried no weight. The board had clipped her authority, her power reduced to ceremonial gestures. She remained angry, furious at her loss of control, but her fury had nowhere to land. The neighborhood had moved on. They had learned something from Mark's quiet defiance. Power only works if people believe in it. The fines stopped. The harassment ceased. The neighbors began to live again, bikes in driveways, lights on fences, flower pots in any color. They liked. The neighborhood, once suffocated by her rules, began to breathe. And Mark? He went back to his yard. He mowed his grass, tinkered in his garage, waved to passing neighbors. Life returned to normal. But every so often, when he rolled out his trash can, reinforced, gleaming, the trap still hidden within, he caught the HOA president watching from across the street. Her face twisted, her fists clenched, her outfit clashing against the daylight. She hadn't forgotten. She never would. In the end, the story wasn't just about a trash can. It wasn't about pink powder or sequined suits or even the absurdity of HOA fines. It was about something bigger. It was about what happens when ordinary people stand up to unreasonable power. When patience, creativity, and a little humor can dismantle the authority of someone who thrives on fear. The neighbors had seen it. The world had seen it. And now, every time someone mentions the HOA, they remember the day the president was coated. In pink powder, her reign toppled in the bright daylight. Her fury turned into farce. And Mark? He became a quiet legend, the man who refused to bow, the man who set a trap no one saw coming. The story ended not with shouts or threats, but with a simple truth. Sometimes the best way to win is to let arrogance walk straight into its own downfall.